I've lost 3 children and my husband. They are all dead. And I am still standing. That is mental strength. 3 things that make you mentally strong. And it's not going to be what you think. And I know everyone says that to get you to watch the whole video, but it really starts with insight. These are not like 3 tricks to make you mentally strong. They are 3 processes that you have to go through. The first is that insight. And, when I think about 3 things that make you mentally strong, and who in our culture right now, kind of has the image of that. And I think of David Goggins. And I can tell you, when I first read David Goggins' book, You Can't Hurt Me, great book. I actually recommend it. But as I was reading that, as a psychiatric nurse practitioner who believes that I am mentally strong, that has overcome significant grief and trauma, I look at David Goggins' story and I see this person who is fiercely compartmentalizing his trauma and using physical accomplishments to process that trauma. And for me, I have a hard time being aggressively athletic, right? And I've tried at certain times in my life. Everyone's like, oh, running is like therapy. If you just get into running, you'll be able to, increase those neurotransmissions and feel better. And there's actually hard science behind that. However, it doesn't work for me. So when I look at someone like David Goggins, I say, what happens when he can no longer run? What happens when he can no longer physically exert himself? But there's also some very therapeutic pieces of what he is doing, because grief and trauma actually have to move outside of the body. And if you can allow that running or that physical exertion to really move those things out of the body, you are actually doing, that process. So we are both mentally strong is where I'm going with this, right? David Goggins has this image of being mentally strong. And sometimes when you read his work, follow him, you think, I have to be that. I will never be a David Goggins. Most of you will never be a David Goggins, right? But you are who you are. I am Cristi Bundukamara. I am mentally strong. I've lost 3 children and my husband. They are all dead. And I am still standing. That is mental strength. So mental strength is not necessarily what you may have put into your mind. I want you to take some personal insight into what truly is mental strength. There is a link in the descriptions that is a choice opportunity. And I call my worksheets choice opportunities because they are that. They are an opportunity to make choices for yourself, for your healing, for your mental strength. And this is called an organized brain is a mentally strong brain, right? And this is what I talk about a lot in the Mentally Strong Method, which you can learn through, our online courses and things like that. But the Mentally Strong Method is about being able to think through your problems, organize them, and make decisions in line with what you want, right? So those are 3 things. I feel like 3 things are always easier to remember. But when we start with that thinking through your problems, there has to be some insight into that. And when I use the word insight, I'm talking about how these things that I'm thinking about, how do they impact me today, right? There's many of you that have experienced grief and trauma in your life, and you either don't have time to go back and process that, you don't think it's impacting your life, and maybe it's not. Not all of our past impacts our life. But whatever you're going through now that makes you think you're not mentally strong, you need to have insight into how your past is impacting that, right? And we do that through a thought map in the Mentally Strong method, is how we help pull out, things like that. Because when you're just doing talk therapy, you can like get into this rumination, and you can just be kind of talking about all of your current problems and maybe even your past problems and how they're impacting you, but you're not pulling them in to the present with an insight. So that is the first thing to being mentally strong, is to having insight. And if you look at that organized brain as a mentally strong brain, you can see that we should be in a continuum. We should not be this compartmentalized brain that puts everything into boxes and never deals with them. And we also shouldn't be this emotionally charged brain where everything is emotionally connected. Neither one of those continuums are helpful and healthy to the present moment. So the first thing in being mentally strong is to have insight into how you are showing up in the world, how the past is showing up in your life right now. And the second thing is, how do you process the things that happen to you? We all have a story. And sometimes I'll hear people say, well, but your story is so intense, and then they minimize their story. That's not helpful for you, right? I tell the intensity of my story so that you can look at me and say, if she can do it, I can do it. It doesn't matter what your story is. It matters how it's impacting you today. Is it, making you feel depressed or anxious? Everything has something behind it. And so the first thing is having that insight, right? But then learning how to process how you show up in the world, how these things impact you, okay? In the Mentally Strong method, we do it through what we call the identify and organize phase, where we put things in categories and we say, okay, what are you doing with your grief? What are you doing with your trauma? And there's different things to do for each category. One of my pet peeves in both the self-development world and differently in the professional talk therapy world, in the self-development world, it's almost like magical thinking. People say, oh, if you just think positive, none of those things will matter. You will be able to be the best version of yourself if you just think positive. That's going to help your negative thoughts. That there is some truth to that, but it's not the only part. On the other hand, the professionals, many of them, not all of them, when they're doing this talk therapy that you don't quite understand what you're doing, you're just sitting there talking about your problems, you are doing just that. You're not bringing in the insight to change its impact on your life now. So if you are needing that professional intervention, ask those questions. I want to show up and know how this has impacted me, and then what can I do about that? How do I actually process it? So in the Mentally Strong method, we put it into different categories. And then I also, when I was going through my most intense grief, I came up with what I call the 5 selves. And this is, how do you actually take care of yourself? We always talk about self-care, but the other ones that I want to talk about today is self-improvement. Are you reading, watching things, listening to things, taking a meditation class, doing something for yourself? Are you self-improving? And then what people don't realize is that grief and trauma must move out of the body, okay? So you can move things out of the body through talking about it, but you have to be careful, because if you're doing talk therapy that turns into rumination, you're actually feeding those neural pathways and like solidifying them. What you want to be doing is kind of the other way around, like releasing them through movement. This is why runners, people who enjoy intense physical activity, feel like they are moving these things out of the body. And this is, when we were talking about David Goggins, he is using intense physical activity to process his trauma. And that is working for him. But it doesn't have to be intense physical trauma. Intense physical working out, but it does need to be some sort of movement, walking and trying to release some of that pain. There's professional techniques like EMDR, brain spotting. These are using your eyes to try to use movement to release or move these things out of the body, right? Music, arts, yoga, meditation, vibration therapy. Like just think of, I've got this trauma, grief, maybe strong emotional charge about something, and I need to release it out of the body. There's energy work like tapping that moves these things out of the body, right? Find what works for you to process these things, right? So the first, to be mentally strong, have insight, know how to process, and making choices based on those things. There's a lot in the self-development world about making choices. Just have discipline and choice, and those things are great. But I challenge that by itself does not make you mentally strong, right? David Goggins is mentally strong because he knows that his trauma impacted him so much that he needs to use this physical activity to process and to make these choices, right? So mental strength starts with insight and then processing, being able to think through your problems, organize them, and then finally making choices in line with what you truly want in your life. I'm Cristi Bundukamara. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but my real experience comes from my life story of losing 3 children and my husband, and being able to navigate that grief and trauma. I encourage you to keep watching. Go into this series called 5 Selves. This is really, being able to take care of yourself on a whole nother level. Keep watching.